It's Florida's rather oldest lighthouse. It's the only one that goes back to the territorial days. And it flashes every 10 seconds. By the way, has anybody been there?
Yeah.
Okay.
It's a nice view.
Yeah, it is. It is, yes. The lens flashes every 10 seconds. It can be seen about 15 miles out to sea. Its day mark, which in lighthouse speak means it's paint, white tower and black up top. Florida lighthouses need day marks, and we've got 3 others here. You see, they've all got different paint styles. When you approach the Florida shore, it's one big beach. So as the mariners were approaching, in order to figure out where they were, they needed that day mark. They could see red stripes, Sapelo, so that they had an idea of where they are. The Lighthouse Board was established in 1852, and this was part of one of their original statements. Nothing indicates liberality, prosperity, or intelligence of a nation more clearly than the facilities to which it affords the mariners to its shores. Lighthouses are welcoming, they're friendly, they get a lot of symbolism as guideposts and lights in the storm and all that kind of thing. And I think that explains part of our fascination with them, plus the fact that we have a wonderful historical piece of history with ours. So where are we geographically here? So we're sitting down here kind of under the E. The red dot is where our lighthouse is. So it's on a bluff about 60 feet tall above Egan's Creek.
Right.
And then it's got another 60-ish feet on top of it. And that means that its point above sea level is 120 feet. And that's kind of a sweet spot for lighthouses. It's the height of St. Augustine. That means it's above the fog, which, we get a lot of fog here, so it's nice to have it above the fog. Other things to notice here. So we know if we go to Fort Clinch and you stand on the beach and look across, we're looking at Cumberland Island. We're looking at Georgia. St. Mary's River is between the two, and there's this lovely sandbar here covering it. We know there's a lot of sand, shoals, and shifting in the river. And we have our port. The port's tucked in there somewhere. And Fernandina's always been known for that port. It's deep, it's safe, it's not too far from the ocean. We know that there can be all sorts of wave action and red flag warnings out on the beach. And the river's pretty calm. So this was a very handy thing for mariners, and it's always been recognized that way. Okay. So how did Fernandina end up being here? I feel a little silly talking about this in the Museum of History, but here goes anyways. So 2 pieces of legislation from 1807. One was that as of January 1st, 1808, people could not be imported to be enslaved. The other was the Embargo Act of 1807. So Napoleonic Wars were going on. France and England were butting heads, mostly at sea, and shooting at each other. They weren't just shooting at each other's boats, they were also shooting at the American ones. And this is the era where the English in particular were scooping up American men and impressing them as sailors, and 2 years later they got back to the States. Well, Jefferson was president, he wanted to put an end to all that. He said, there's going to be an embargo. You cannot bring any goods into the United States. Plus you got hefty tariffs. So this was absolute disaster for some of the northern cities because they were so dependent on the maritime trade. But of course, Florida was still part of Spain. You could bring in whatever you wanted. Bring stuff in, load it in wagons, take it overland into Georgia. You've avoided tariffs, you've broken all sorts of laws, but that's what they did. So stuff kept coming in. And they needed a lighthouse. They needed to mark that nasty sandbar across the St. Mary's. So in 1820, the lighthouse was built on Cumberland. This chart's from 1829, but we can see here where the lighthouse was. So if in the 1820s you were standing outside of what's now Fort Clinch and looked across, you would have seen that lighthouse. Now we're not exactly certain what it looked like because there's a drawing that shows this lovely 120-foot lighthouse. But my husband's been doing a lot of research, and he has found a newspaper advertisement asking for bids to build a lighthouse on Cumberland, and it describes essentially our lighthouse. 65 feet tall, 2-layer brick, all that. So we're not exactly certain what was there, but he's still researching this, so eventually he'll tell us. And the Cumberland Lighthouse worked quite well for a while. 1822, Florida became a territory, and that's why I've got, and 1807 to 1822, things were kind of wild. That was the pirate era, and that's why I've got this lovely female pirate here, just because she entertains me and represents the pirates. Territory in 1822, and by the 1830s, the lighthouse on Cumberland apparently was not that effective anymore. The shoals kept shifting, hard to see, and all its workings after 15 years on of sea exposure were not in very good shape. Because remember, the lights in these things were oil lamps, and you had 15 of them stacked with big reflectors. Things don't wear well in the salt air, we know this. So in 1834, the mariners, merchants, etc. were starting to make noise. Can we please have a lighthouse on Amelia? And they got the lighthouse. So here's some of the specifications for the lighthouse and the dwelling house. Beautiful copper plate, gorgeous handwriting, and very, very specific. Hard brick, these dimensions to these dimensions, all of that. And this is what it would have looked like. This drawing is from 1859. And Winslow Lewis was the architect. He was the guy that said, this is how you build a lighthouse. And he did all the description, worked with everything. He felt he was the king of lighthouses. He also had the patent on the light fixtures. He was no fool. So in and now part of what comes in these specifications, or a follow-up letter, is that you can build this lighthouse on Amelia for $9,000, but you can save $3,000 if you use the parts that are on Cumberland. So they used the brick. They took it down, cleaned up the brick, brought it all over. So when people say that our lighthouse started on Cumberland, it did. But when you say you move a lighthouse, there's always this image of, well, let's just take it like a big piece and didn't do that. The original hope apparently was that they could continue to use the light fixture. However, it was too far gone. So when it came over here, it was a new light fixture, and I think it was 14 or 15 individual whale oil burners, and they each had their own big reflector. So think about it. The lightkeeper had to keep all those reflectors shiny and clean to help increase the light. And they mounted them, they called it a chandelier, in kind of a triangular shape. And then the whole thing sat on a wooden clockwork. So if you think of a clockwork as something that runs like a grandfather clock, same, and just like a grandfather clock, big chain to pull it, and then the thing would turn. And that's how you got that flash out at sea. So here's one view from the top of our lighthouse. It was actually lit in March of 1839. And the brick came. We're not sure about the stairs because there are those lovely granite stairs there now. But the lightkeeper came also. Amos Latham was our first lightkeeper, and he had been working as lightkeeper on Cumberland. So he moved across the river and came to the new lighthouse. 1845, Florida became a state. And in 1856, we got our first third-order Fresnel lens. The Fresnel lenses are ordered in size, so third order is about 4 feet tall. So how does this thing work? Okay, so if you want to magnify light, you figure big magnifying glass, right? Well, they couldn't make magnifying glasses that big. But there was a guy in France, Augustin Fresnel, who was fascinated with light. And he did a lot of work. Is light a particle? Is it a wave? What is this? He realized it's a wave. And in 1821, he designed these lenses. Because what he found is that if you, not sure how well you can see this, but we've got a little red beam coming in here, hitting the prism, bouncing off, and coming out. And that's how Fresnel, the lenses work, so that they are able to refract the light and make it that much brighter. So when you've got the lens here, now this is ours, this is another one that I have here so that you can see it side on, because it's really hard to get a picture of ours like that. Each little section here is an individual prism. They're about 3 inches wide at the fattest part, and then they narrow down to nothing, so they're triangular. And the light, you have one light source in there. It will come out to, it'll bounce around inside each prism, getting multiplied, and you get this huge white flash because the light gets that much brighter. The mariners, they started using these over in Europe way before the United States. The fact that Winslow Lewis had that patent on those old oil rigs meant that he kept saying, oh, this is the best light, this is the best light, this is the best light. And then finally, the Lighthouse Board said, those Fresnels are better, we're putting those in. So they had they had them earlier in Europe than they did here, than we did here. Finally got them, and everybody said, wow, that thing is bright. What else with them? Okay, so Fresnel lenses, we're still using them today all over the place. Look at a car headlight, or the little yellow side lights. You see all those little ridges in the plastic, the covers? That's a Fresnel lens. Before we had LEDs for stoplights, they had little ridges, same thing. So you got that little light bulb in there that you can make a lot brighter by sending it through all of these prisms. The inside of this is hollow. It's basically just a big shell. I'm trying to think. Does that all make sense about how the lens works? Okay. I feel like I got a little chopped up on my explanation there. Oh, and here you can see the effect of it. This is, I took this last fall, one of those, we had some really foggy nights. Took it then, and you can see how sharp the beams are and the effect of it. There's a red one because, as we know, the south end of the island, off of American Beach and Peters Point and all there, is pretty shallow. As the boats were coming up north along there, in the early 20th century, they were starting to go aground. So in 1917, they put a red piece in there so that the light would flash red to the south there. And then as they came north, when they saw white, they knew then they could start to come in a little closer. And is this here now? Okay. So these whale oil was used until after the Civil War. Oil was found in Pennsylvania in 1859, and the whales had a party. So this is from 1861, and check out our happy little dancer here. Because whale oil was all they had for lighting, for good lighting at that time. And whale population was getting decimated. So it was a real gift to the whales when they found the oil. And like I say, they had a party. United States did keep using whale oil until after the Civil War. And then they switched to a lard oil made out of pig fat until the 1880s. And that's when they actually started using a petroleum product. They went to kerosene. And if you visit lighthouses, you'll find that near them, and we have one, ours is 1890, there's an oil house, a little building to store the kerosene. Up until then, they would be able to store it in the bottom of the lighthouse, but there were a few bad fires, and they said, uh-oh, this stuff's flammable, let's give it its own storage. Ours still smells like kerosene if you visit. Civil War years. So when the Civil War came, the Confederacy realized that it would be really hard to protect all these little islands that we, here, Georgia, up the coast. And they pretty much handed them over to the United States. They said, that's it, we can't protect them, we're leaving them. Most of the local population left. They did tell the locals to please dismantle your lighthouse. Don't leave the United States, the Union, a great aid to navigation. So a Fernandina lawyer took out our lens, tucked it on a wagon, and brought it inland somewhere in Florida. We don't have all those details. And then after the war came back and they reinstalled it. I've got Fort Clinch here because Fort Clinch during the war, of course, was a Union outpost and housed close to 2,000 people, including the roughly 900 formerly enslaved African Americans who said, "Union, we're free, we're staying." And a lot of them spent the war up at Fort Clinch. Ranges. So, those shoals and all keep shifting. So then you need a range because you've got your one light. It's like, well, where do we come in? Gets confusing. Well, then you need something to help you in. So they put in a range. You've got your main light and put in something below so that as you move, once they line up, now I see my direction in. Well, we had a lot of ranges because, of course, things kept shifting. If you go to Fort Clinch, as you're driving that road north, opposite the Willow Pond Nature Trails, on the other side of the road, you're all nodding, you've seen it already, there's a little fenced-off spot where a range light was, and remnants of its oil house, because each range, of course, needed its own oil house. This one was out on the beach, and I like this one, because this one, these things kept shifting. Then somebody got clever and said, let's put it on a railroad track. So out at the beach on Fort Clinch, it was like a 100-foot long railroad track so they could keep adjusting it and keep it in there. And if you're ever out on Cumberland Sound, there are ranges out there now that you can see use in daylight that are these big, huge orange things. Yeah. And then get to our cottages. Where did these lightkeepers live? So this is more of that drawing from 1859, and we have the first keeper's cottage. And the description of that was very clear. And it was a pretty nice house for 1838. Wooden floor, solid walls, bit of a basement, fireplace at either end, Federal style. 2 rooms, one on either side here with a little hallway between, and lofts above. So just like a sleeping space above. And then an L out the back that we can't see here that they described building a kitchen room out the back. And if you look at the top of the lighthouse, it looks a little different than it does now. So there's the walkway, and then there's the lens. When we come to the next generation of lighthouses of ours, a little longer there. Okay, if you look at the top of this one, this is what ours looks like. There's that big black section. That's a mechanical room. So in 1881, they wanted to upgrade the mechanical part, the motor that would turn the lens. So they took down the lens, built this mechanical room, and then put the lens up top. So that was the change in appearances there. And the walkway is now outside of the mechanical room. So that first dwelling lasted until 1860. And then the next generation of housing, much bigger, much more established looking, and probably a duplex, 2 houses next to each other. This was the era that lighthouse keepers had assistants. So you had the keeper and their family there, and then the assistant and their family. So they would have had the 2 houses right next to each other. That stayed until about 1886 when this one was built. Now this is a 20th century picture of it. We know that because it has this little L attached that came in the 20th century. But I like this one because we can see the water tower and the clothesline, and we can also see that that Fort Clinch and everything above there, the north end, is starting to get their trees back. This had all been cleared for lumber. Much of our island was cleared for lumber. What we're seeing is 2nd and 3rd growth now. So I like this one because the trees are coming back. Now that building, this one here, came down in 1962, and that's when the current one was built, this little cottage, which one of the website's Lighthouse Friends describes as being, quote, utterly charmless, which it is. However, 1962, it's a ranch house. And it was very well sited because its front door is here, or was overlooking the bluff on the creek. And for 1962, it was still a pretty nice house. 3 big bedrooms, two good sized bathrooms, 2 full baths, good closets, good spaces. It's nicer than the house I grew up in, so I'm impressed. And it's still being used. It's not being used as a residence now. The Coast Guard Auxiliary uses it for meetings and boaters' ed classes and whatnot. Our keepers' lives. In the 1870s, the Lighthouse Board kept changing the rules and adding rules. So in the 1870s, they had very specific rules for the keepers. And they said, first of all, the keepers needed to be male. Well, we know that wasn't true. A lot of women worked as lighthouse keepers. Quite often what would happen is that the keeper would pass away, accident, illness, whatever, and his wife, or sometimes daughter, niece, whoever, had been helping do the job all along, and they would petition Congress to please let me have this job. And quite often the folks in the local village would do a letter writing campaign to Congress saying, please hire Mrs. Smith to have that job. So there were many, many women employed as lightkeepers. And if you think about it, 19th century, if a woman, say she's got 3 kids, living in a small town, suddenly finds herself with no breadwinner, she wanted that job. And they were able to do it quite relatively easily. They also said you needed to be able to read and write by the 1870s. So the requirements were male, literate, and not a drunkard. That had been a problem, clearly. So the keepers spent their days taking care of the light. Their jobs, it was truly a 24/7 thing. Light the light at night, out in the morning, maintain it all night, and in the days of the multiple lenses, you had 15 separate lamps to maintain. Once they got the Fresnels, then it was just one, but you still had to take care of it. Clean everything in the morning, especially how kerosene, if you don't adjust it quite right, you get a lot of soot. They were also responsible for maintaining the property. So there was a lot of whitewashing. One of the logbooks talks about a duck flying through a window at 3 a.m. The next day, replaced the window pane. But they did have time to read. And when the Lighthouse Board realized that they were spending a fair amount of time reading, they started sending out libraries. So this is, I took these pictures at a museum up in Maine, but this is a sample library. Every 3 months they would rotate them, and they would have in them fiction, nonfiction, reference books, a Bible, sometimes a cookbook, something for kids, and my own personal hope is they had a Godey's Ladies book in there so the women could see the fashions they were not keeping up with. And the Lighthouse Service had china. Different styles over the years. That's not Lighthouse Service china, but it's pretty. But this has Lighthouse Service on there. There's a lighthouse. They had china. And here's one of our keepers. So Dwayne Sidiam here, gorgeous guy in his beard. There's his cow. And this would have been 1880s. So there's, tucked back there is that second dwelling house. He was assistant keeper from 1871 to 73 and lead keeper from 1880 to 91. So he had a pretty good run. And he was here in 1881 when they built that new mechanical room on top. So we've been to the National Archives where you can actually see the old log books. They're all sitting there in DC. And I had a great time with them. So the log books, they're a little bit bigger than a legal pad. They're about like that. Here's just a sample cover of one that was a nicer one. A lot of them were pretty beat up. But they recorded it every day. The weather was clear, the winds out of the southeast, whatever, and any additional notes. And of course, they were supposed to be no personal notes. So we have down here, station inspected by, I'm not sure who it was, and a major. But also in here we have a note that says, mashed toe unloading iron at wharf. Unable to work, Mrs. Sudium tending light. He was they were unloading the material to put that mechanical room on. He did not make note like the next month when he got back to work. But he did leave us a note in 1888. In the middle here it says, "I have today stopped using tobacco." Yeah. So personal stuff snuck in. This one's from 1934. I'm jumping ahead a little bit in time, but it goes with logbooks. And we have here, daughter born to keeper's wife at 8:15 a.m. And that was January 1934. And that was Helen O'Hagan Sintis. The O'Hagan family were keepers from 1905 to 1954. So Helen grew up here. And she grew up here, married, moved away. When she and her husband retired, they came back so she could tend the lighthouse. So back in the, I guess in the 1990s, she was giving the tours. And she would say, "Welcome to my lighthouse." She had a very personal feeling about it. And that's why she's in her Coast Guard auxiliary uniform there. Okay. Come to the 20th century. In 1903, they replaced our Fresnel with the current one. Replaced the old Fresnel with the current one. They wanted a faster blink. The old one was blinking every 90 seconds. This one was every 10 seconds. Technology kept changing and improving. Boats are approaching the island faster. They said, we need to tell us sooner when we're getting there. And so they replaced it with our current one that blinks every 10 seconds. 1905, Thomas Patrick O'Hagan became lightkeeper, the start of the O'Hagan dynasty. Marked that red sector in 17, and then Thomas Patrick's son Thomas John became lightkeeper in 1925. And he had the long run until 1954. His daughter was Helen, and Helen's son Tom, after he retired in Nebraska, came back here, and he now does the tours and helps to keep the light too, which is kind of fun. 1930, we got electricity. The lighthouse wasn't electrified till I'm sorry. I had a picture here of the family. Yes, let me go back to Thomas Patrick in 1905. So there's Thomas Patrick. I believe I'm not sure which one is where his wife is up there, but 11 kids. Wow. He moved here with 11 children, and that's why they built that little addition onto the side. Remember that picture I said there's an addition? Yeah. A 12th was born while they were here, and he requested this posting. He had been keeper at Ponce Inlet, which was very much off by itself, middle of nowhere. If you visit Ponce Inlet and look at some of the records and things, there's all this stuff about from the local school, because at one point they had enough kids to have their own school. And when you looked at the end of year, performances, end of year event, and it lists all the kids' names, half of them were O'Hagan. So 1904, 1905, he said, "Can I have that posting on Amelia Island where there's a good Catholic school I can send my kids to?" And that's why they came here.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, and the 12th child was born when they were here, so there wasn't an even dozen. So that was the start of the O'Hagans. That's why they came here. Electricity. This is an assortment of bulbs. They kept everything with lighthouses pretty much stays current with technology. So at various points they've used these huge 1,000-watt bulbs, and then there have been halogens, and now we have an LED, and I'll show you a picture of that in a bit. Lighthouse electrified in 1933. In 1939, the lighthouse service was taken over by the Coast Guard. Up until then, it had been its own independent government agency. Folded into the Coast Guard in 1939, and that clarified things, simplified things. The lightkeepers that wanted to keep their jobs had to join the Coast Guard. So the O'Hagan of the moment did join the Coast Guard then. And what Helen said is, she remembers this. It was a big deal because her father's boat got a motor. Mm-hmm. Up until then, he had just been rowing. And part of his job, by the 30s, He was also responsible for keeping an eye on the ranges, the aids to navigation. You look at his his log books, and he makes notes. Checked the ranges, went down the river with the Atons, all that. So joining the Coast Guard was very beneficial to his life. World War II, they posted 6 regular Coast Guard men here at the lighthouse. Somebody was always up on that walkway looking out to sea, looking for U-boats. And we did have 2 boats sunk by U-boats, one off of Cumberland, one off of Jacksonville Beach. And apparently the family, of course, kind of adopted the Coast Guard guys and made sure they were fed and entertained. The mechanism was automated in 1970. And then we no longer needed a lightkeeper. They did continue, the Coast Guard continued to use the cottage as housing into the 1970s and maybe into the 80s. Apparently there's a lot of vandalism. There's something about lighthouses that also attracts, let's shoot holes at it and shoot holes in the windows and that sort of thing. And the Coast Guard found that by having people living there, that kept the vandalism down. And then we come to the 21st century. So this is looking inside our lens. There are 2 pieces of that, of these things here, 2 sections that fold out so you can get access to the inside. Here's our LED. So by the year 2000, the Coast Guard was realizing that all these lighthouse properties were costing them a pretty penny, and they were kind of an anachronism. So the solution was the National Lighthouse Preservation Act. What that act said is that appropriate local entities could take on the lighthouses. So if you visit lighthouses, you'll find that a lot of them are run by the local lighthouse society. Some of them are in state parks or town parks. Ours was taken over by the city of Fernandina Beach. So that whole lighthouse property is actually owned by the city. The tower, all the property, all that. What the Coast Guard kept was the lens. So the Coast Guard still has the lens. They're the ones that said, you need an LED, we'll put it in and give it to the new electronics. And when the electronics decided they weren't working, they came and made sure they could work. And that's where the Coast Guard Auxiliary comes in. The Auxiliary is a uniformed volunteer organization that supports the Coast Guard. And part of how we support the Coast Guard is by taking care of the light. So once a week, there's a maintenance crew. Once a week, people go up, make sure the light's working properly, sweep down the stairs, do the cleaning, a lot of cleaning, and pretty much take care of the light. The city, in exchange for this, I don't know all the details of it, lets the auxiliary use the cottage, so it gets used for boaters ed classes, first aid classes, flotilla meetings, storage of equipment. There's a big radio room up there. If everything falls apart because there's a hurricane, that thing will work. And we take care of the light. So if you're going to visit the light, you do it through Parks and Rec, but I'll have more about that in a minute. And then once the city took over, there was a renovation. 2004, there was a renovation. They rebuilt a lot of the exterior. That metalwork was shot after all those years in the salt air, so that got rebuilt. Went on the National Registry of Historic Places in 2008. The LED came in 24, and then in 2025, just last summer, we had there was the exterior renovation, and here's some of the crew working. They told us that they repaired a mile of cracks. They put up scaffolding. So they put up the scaffolding, covered the whole thing with fabric so everything stayed kind of contained, and then cleaned out the cracks, filled in, painted. They put on a coating, mineral silica coating. They say will be good for 20 years. And if you go up and see it now, it's all kind of lovely, shiny and glowing. Last winter, they then worked on the interior. They cleaned off a lot of the brick inside, and they have yet to tell us what the next step is. We're not sure if they've even decided yet if they're going to paint it again or leave it bare or seal it or what's going to happen next. It's all kind of still in progress. Money paid for it, a lot of grant money. If you ever see, see a license plate on somebody's car that has Lighthouse on it. We lived in New Jersey, and I had this lovely conserve wildlife license plate, and I always wondered if the money actually went to conserve wildlife. Turned out in New Jersey, nobody knows where it went. But in Florida, that lighthouse plate, the Florida Lighthouse Society can tell you how much money they got from it, and they helped to provide a grant, part of the grant money, to do that repair. Now, visit the lighthouse. Yes, you said you climbed it. At the moment, the city says no climbing. The auxiliary climbs to do maintenance. There are some groups that have applied, and in fact, a week from Saturday, the Florida Lighthouse Association is having they meet twice a year at different lighthouses. They're meeting here, and they've got permission to climb, but they all had to sign, they got to sign extra permission slips, and there's extra insurance and all this, because the city lawyers are just petrified of what could happen. But this is what it looks like. 59 granite stairs, and then at the top there's another 8 metal stairs. When you get up there, and by the way, the handrail here, I'm told by somebody that climbed it in the 90s that there was no handrail. I think that came in 2004 with that part of that renovation. When you get up top there, so this is now inside that mechanical room, inside that black banded room. There's the stair coming up to it. There's another 8 stairs going up to the lens room, and this is in there too. And one of the interesting things that you see in there is this little round circle here is a vent. These things ran, the old light, before electricity, it was a flame, so they could adjust the vent to have the right amount of air to have the most efficient flame. And this is there's the mechanical now that's running the light. The light again, the lens room. And this picture I actually took off of one of Visit Amelia Island touristy websites, but it's gorgeous, and obviously a drone did it, and got that great sideways shot and the sunset. And then when you're up there, this is the view. So, so here's looking out towards, where are we? We're back there someplace. There's the water tank opposite Central Park, courthouse spire there. I can just see some river beyond. Heading north, here's the loading dock. We know we're still in active loading docks for the port. We're still in active port. Here's Main Beach. There are the condos along Main Beach. We can see ocean beyond. So you see, you do get quite a view from up there. And the marshes, Egan's Creek in front. More of Egan's Creek. Here we're looking towards the fort. Another view across the creek. And then Atlantic Avenue. There's Atlantic Avenue, the rec center, and this is an excellent place to get a nice view of the lighthouse. Is that spot along Atlantic Avenue there? Now, if you want to visit our lighthouse, it's open on Saturdays from 11 to 2, but just the grounds. Generally, it's the house is locked up. If you want a tour, first and third Wednesdays they do tours, the city offers tours. You pre-register with Parks and Rec. Call Parks and Rec, tell them you want to go. I think the minimum is now 5 or 6 people. And we do get groups. This morning we had a group of history buffs from Del Webb. 20 people came by. And then you take a bus from the rec center on Atlantic Avenue. And that way there are fewer cars coming up, because over the years the neighbors, of course this is now a lovely residential neighborhood, have said it's an awful lot of people visiting that lighthouse, so that it does cost $10, and there is no access to the top. The regular tour, you get inside, and that's it. And you get a shortened version of this talk. Any questions? Any questions? Any confusion?
So I'd like to share something.
Yes.
I had the pleasure of my great grandfather served at the lighthouse at one time. But, I don't have the dates, and he also served at the Fort Finch in Singapore. Yeah, my family was one of the first families on the island. I'm born of Old Town.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm born right on White Street. So I just appreciate history so much, and now we're getting people coming here, they want to automatically be historians, which I find interesting.
Well, I've learned a lot since moving here.
So where are y'all from originally?
Originally Massachusetts,
Okay, okay.
most recently New Jersey.
Oh, very good.
So we are damn Yankees. We came in this town.
Yeah, I have a relative of ours to go up there and receive an award from JFK himself at one time.
Mm.
Yeah, so welcome here. However long you've been here, how long have you been here?
4 years.
Oh, okay.
I've learned a lot of history. We've learned a lot of history in 4 years.
Yeah, I was in Massachusetts. We loved JFK. I was there.
Oh, you were there.
I was there.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah, my family, believe it or not, when my family left Old Town, that's where they went, to Massachusetts.
Oh, all right. What part?
They went to Roxbury. I still have family in Dorchester.
Okay.
And
Yeah, my parents grew up in Dorchester too.
they have lived a beautiful life.
Yes.
Yeah, they lived
Oh,
a
yeah.
beautiful life up there.
Yeah. Good place to land.
Oh yeah, they lived a beautiful life.
Yeah.
And we've lived a beautiful life in Old Town.
Mhm. Oh yeah.
Yeah, we've lived a perfect life in Old Town. Mhm.
It almost seems to me like it's placed a little further back from the shoreline than I would have thought. Why did it end up in that particular spot?
We think because they could put it on the bluff. We think because they could put it on the bluff. They got that height. Yeah. Yeah, and that's probably why it's still here. You know, so many of them that got put right on the shore got destroyed, and erosion took them, and exposure and all that. But we figure that's why it's still there.
So was that bluff natural? They didn't
Yes.
build it up?
Yeah,
So-
yeah, that's natural.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, yeah. But however the dunes formed,
Yeah,
because we're basically just a couple of big dunes.
absolutely.
Yeah, but that's how that ended up there. At one time, those drawings that show the 1859 drawing that shows the light and the cottage and all also shows where steps would be to go down to the creek.
Okay.
And one of the stories that Tom Sintis tells from his mother's era was playing down there and maneuvering their way down there, and apparently the boys would swing on vines and all the stuff kids did in the 40s, you know. Yeah, all the good stuff.
I'm sure she was swinging on the vines as well.
Yeah, probably, true.
You know, the guy who built this lighthouse by the name of Winslow Lewis was an old seagoing captain, so he's got a very interesting history. These lighthouses started with what is called the Lewis lamp, and it looked like he just violated somebody else's design, the Argon lamp from another guy in France, but he got the U.S. government to patent his version of it, and he got the U.S. government to buy it from him, the patent, and he got the U.S. government to have him provide all the lights and build the lights, and he had the contracts to deliver the whale oil to lighthouses until somebody underbid him in 1817 or thereabouts. And he built about 80 lighthouses in all, and he was a very opinionated charlatan. There is no reason to have any lighthouse higher than 65 feet. So luckily, this one is built up on a bluff because it gives you that visibility out. And a lot of his he built about 80. There are about 5 that still exist. This one, Little Cumberland Island, which is privately owned, Sapelo Island, which if you go and visit Sapelo Island, you'll see the inside looks just like our light. You can climb the Sapelo Island light. I don't know, there's 2 others that I don't know where they are. They're still existing. But there are a lot of complaints. His own nephew testified against him about how shoddy his construction was. So we're very fortunate that this light is still there, because they were tipping over, built too close to the ocean. One light in the panhandle of Florida, they built it on wooden beams. And it didn't take long for the wood to shift or get rotten and the lighthouse tips over. We're very fortunate that our lighthouse is still standing, given the charlatan who built it. But it's interesting. You can have a lecture on just Winslow Lewis.
I have one more question.
Yeah.
So, are there any specifications to back in the day to being the keeper? Like, did you have to have any type of prior?
No. In fact, the earliest keepers were all political appointees. And if you look at the list, unfortunately, I didn't. There's a whole list. I didn't think to bring it. A list of all our keepers, and you can see that's why I need to know who your relative is, so I can find them on the list and be able to tell people this guy was born here. He was a local. You know, a lot of them were just a couple of years. And then it was around, I think, 1860s, 1870s, that then it became less of a political thing and more of a desire thing. Because let's face it, this was a crappy job. You know, 24/7, crappy job. I think it was Sudiam made note or was quoted some places saying, I have been on this job nonstop for 10 years. You know, he never took a day off. And when you looked at the logs, there will be comments in there. The missus departed today for 2 weeks to visit her mother in Jacksonville. You know, you saw that too. But yeah, that's a terrible job. So it was first political, and then it became desire. But in the 1870s, and I don't remember the exact year, was when the Lighthouse Board said, literate, not a drunkard, and preferably male. Yeah, that's when they started to do that. 20th century, I think it was just, again, back to desire and ability, because you needed somebody that could fix things, was willing to work all night, all that kind of stuff.